in that year, I was so angry because I felt like there was just such a bigger picture that we were missing, right? Like I would go to meetings and I would feel a lot of comfort there, and I met some great people, but it was like, why aren't we talking about this outside of these secret meetings? That seemed insane to me.
Hello and welcome to another exclusive interview by Recovery Today magazine at recoverytodaymagazine.com, where first and foremost, we're a magazine of hope. Whether you're considering addiction recovery for yourself or a loved one, or you're actively in recovery for a short while or many years, you'll find information on all topics related to addiction, recovery, codependency, and living a happy, successful, sober life at Recovery Today. My name is Sherry Gaba, and I'm the editor of Recovery Today magazine, and I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing another amazing guest, Laura McKowen, who inspires people to say yes to a bigger life. She's the author of the forthcoming memoir, We Are the Luckiest, The Surprising Magic of a Sober Life, which number one New York Times bestselling author Glennon Doyle has called a masterpiece. She has been featured on WebMD, The Guardian, The New York Post, Bravo, and The Today Show. She writes an internationally recognized award-winning blog, is the host of 2 top 100 iTunes podcasts, and leads sold-out retreats and courses focused on sobriety and personal development. Hi, Laura. How are you?
Hello. I'm great.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You are so welcome. Well, tell us about your book, We Are the Luckiest. Tell me how it came to be.
Yeah. So, the title comes from, I think like most people who are faced with getting sober, having to get sober, I thought that would be the end of everything, that it was, a death sentence of sorts. And that it was the end of all the fun and all the goodness and love and a social life and everything, really. And that people who could drink, quote unquote, normally were lucky. And I also, I thought that people that I would hear people who were sober say that they were grateful and happy and that their lives were amazing. And I just didn't buy it, right? I thought it was that they must have deluded themselves into thinking that just so they could, because of course they did, how else would they go on? I didn't buy it. And it took me about a year from the time I started to try to get sober to actually get sober. And then once I had a little bit of time, it was a very normal, everyday kind of night that I was having. I was home with my daughter. She was sleeping next to me. And, I was in a lot of pain, as a lot of people are in early sobriety. It was hard. It was really hard emotionally. And I had this moment, though, where I was just laying in bed. I was about to go to sleep, and I had been crying, and it sort of just passed, and I thought, this pain has a purpose, and this is kind of what I always wanted. Like I wanted a direct experience of life, right? I just saw it very clearly in that moment that I was lucky. Like I was lucky that I wasn't actively destroying anything in that moment. I wasn't going to wake up with any regret. My daughter was safe next to me and sleeping, and I was safe in my clean sheets, and everything was kind of okay. And I posted something to Instagram with that line, "We are the luckiest," or I felt like the luckiest, and it just kind of, it caught on, because I do believe that, I really do. Anyone who gets to wake up, the opportunity to wake up to their life, to their potential, and to who they could be, and no matter what it is, whether it's addiction or something else, it is a lucky thing,
Yeah, I know so many people do play small, and I think that a lot of people that are alcoholics or whatever, heavy drinkers, so forth, their self-esteem often is playing small. They just don't have high self-esteem. I hear that over and over.
Right.
I heard you say something about, normal drinkers were the luckiest or something like that. And I'm thinking like every client that comes into my office will say, I just want to be a normal drinker. That is the thing that every single client does.
Right.
That and I don't want to that and I don't want to go to a meeting because I'm shy.
Whatever that means.
Yeah. So I just thought
I mean, who doesn't, right? And now my perception of there even being such a thing as normal drinking and all that is very different. I didn't want to have the thing that I didn't want to have the thing that I had. I didn't want to give up drinking, really.
So are you, there, first of all, you're part of the whole recovery influence movement. And I don't know, you probably don't even like that word, but you are kind of a trailblazer. And I just wonder, I think it's fantastic. I do something similar with the Al-Anon, so to speak. That's my thing, because I was married to a wonderful person who just happened to be an alcoholic.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you think like all of this waters down the founders of the 12 Steps original purpose, or I don't think it does, but, and I'm sure you don't either, but I think some would
talk
say
about that.
Yeah, like what is your thinking about, like, because there's so many options today.
Yeah, I don't see it as a watering down. I mean, there's no other, we don't really look at any other problem that we have health wise or otherwise, mental health wise, any problem that you could imagine and say there is only one solution forever. We don't do that. So why would we ever do that with addiction? It's crazy. So I see AA as AA was great for me. I still have a sponsor. I think the 12 steps are beautiful, and it's not the only answer, and it's not the only. I don't go to meetings anymore. I found a lot of things that I really didn't agree with in the in the 12-step program or in the AA program, in the fellowship and all that. So, and that's okay. I mean, that's what I try to tell people. It's okay. First of all, there's nothing that's perfect for everybody. And it's ludicrous. And if anyone tells you that you're not on the right track, if you don't buy into something, whether it's A or something else, you can throw that away.
Exactly.
It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. There's a lot of things in the 12 steps that will say, we're going to direct your life. You're going to listen to us. We are going to lead you. And I think sometimes, even though, you may be newly sober, you still can have your own your own intuition, your own whatever to you, whatever resonates. And I think sometimes, and again, I'm a member of the other program in the 12 steps, so I love it, but I think sometimes it does undervalue the fact that we do have a voice and we have options.
Well, I think where the problem really lies, because if you look at just what the program actually is, it is the 12 steps. That's the program of recovery. Everything else is stuff that people created. So it's going to vary widely, and it's going to be, the fellowships are going to vary dramatically depending on where you are.
That's
so
true.
I've been to some AA meetings where I've literally walked out after 5 minutes because it was just like, no way, this is, and I had the advantage when I was going to be in a big city. So there was a very different experience. So I think a lot of the dysfunction or misrepresentation of AA is this thinking that it's the fellowship, and it's really not. It's the 12 steps. And those don't change, and those are kind of just ancient spiritual wisdom as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, for
sure. That could be applied to anybody for anything. So not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but I think that's important for people to know, because it also happens to be still the most broad and widely available program that exists. So I hate for people who may benefit from going to a meeting finding other people who are sober at a meeting, to just turn it down because of something that they heard, right? And I want people to know too, it's a lot of people get sober and never go to an AA meeting, and they do great. But you have to have something. You really do have to have something. And I guess we could call it a program, but it's not enough to just stop drinking. And I'm sure you see that all the time. And
you need community. You absolutely
need community. Right.
So how did your movement kind of take off? Like what was the history of that? Because you're a trailblazer.
So obviously I never intended for that to happen, but I did. So when I was trying to get sober, I, sort of started on that path in July of 2013. And then I didn't get sober finally until over a year later. And in that year, I was so angry because I felt like, there was just such a bigger picture that we were missing, right? Like I would go to meetings and I would feel a lot of comfort there, and I met some great people, but it was like, why aren't we talking about this outside of these secret meetings? That seemed insane to me.
It almost leaves it kind of like keeps the shame indoors.
It doesn't almost, it absolutely does. It's like,
yeah.
Why would we do that? It didn't make sense to me. And it also, there were aspects of the way that I don't like the labels at all. I don't call myself an alcoholic. I don't walk around thinking that all my, problems in my life or the difficulties I have are at the root because of this disease that none of that made sense to me at a very deep level. It was like, I rejected it very hard, and not because I didn't think I had a problem with alcohol. Like I knew that, I had no doubt about that. I fully accepted that finally. But it was like, this isn't going to be the core of my identity. And it's also, I knew that more modern conversations needed to happen. And I also felt like this idea that there are people who can drink, and that's everybody except for if you fall into this alcoholic category. It was like, I looked around at all the people that I knew, my friends, my family, and it was like, there's this significant, we are really duped when it comes to alcohol. We are crazy. We don't even see how big of a problem it is.
God, yes, right. Like people there was normal drinkers, but they're really not normal drinkers.
Or just the fact that we think that anyone should be able to ingest this drug. It's really a drug, and it's really harmful, and it's really ubiquitous. It's like everywhere. It's like a foregone conclusion that the alcohol belongs everywhere, until you cross this imaginary place where then you have a problem, so you better go deal with it. And I was drinking, that was when I was a young mom. Moms were drinking like crazy. They still are. It's this whole culture. Yeah.
My daughter, I have a granddaughter, and she went to this like mother's meeting for the new preschool, and it was like 10 in the morning. And she said, "Mom, you're not going to believe it. They were drinking." Mm-hmm. I'm like, 10 in the morning? What?
Yeah, no, it's like, it is it's a culture thing. And it's, I could go off on that for a long time, but I just felt like there's this much bigger thing that we're not talking about. I wasn't content to just take my, alcoholic ID card and continue to go to meetings and count days and months and years. And I just wasn't. I couldn't. There was like this thing. And at the same time, I started writing, because it's something I'd always wanted to do. And now I had a story to tell. So I started really writing my way through my experience of getting sober.
Oh, so you started with a book.
I started with a blog. I was writing on my blog for a couple of years, and pretty consistently. And then I started a home podcast with my friend Holly. I'd always wanted to start a podcast, and because I listened to them. This was like in 2015, before there were a million podcasts.
Millions of them, yeah.
And I convinced my friend Holly to do it, and we started home, and it became this big thing, which we didn't really predict. I mean, it still gets an absurd number of listens, because I think that people were ready for that conversation. The one that I had been having in my mind, that like there's something missing here in this whole sphere. There's just like the conversation that's not being had, and we just started to talk about everything, sex and relationships and dating and family and any conversation that you would want to have.
Don't
shame
necessarily have at a meeting because you're focused on the principles.
Or you could have it in a meeting, maybe, or with your sober friends,
Yeah.
But there was no public conversation. And look, so many people are sitting there. I know a lot of women, they email me every day, mothers, non-mothers, women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who are sitting there, and they can't go to a meeting, or they might not want to, but this is on their mind, and we can look up everything else online.
Yeah.
We can hear conversations, we can watch videos, we can find websites, and yet there was like this nothing. There was nothing around this.
It's unbelievable that this was just 2013, 14. I mean,
right? No, totally. It's changed a lot. And so we started home, and that became a big thing. And then that's what really started everything for me. And I've met, so many people, and there's lots of,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you still do the podcast?
No, we stopped in 2018. We did it for 3 years.
Okay.
Every week. And, but we, she went to start her company, Tempest, and I was going and doing things. And, I mean, I still do tons of work in this area, and, her whole company is based in, has a sobriety school and stuff like that. But no, we stopped doing it.
Okay. But you have a program too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get into that. Let me just get into a little bit more about, drinking was your thing, and you've always encouraged your readers to recognize their thing, that what is it that's standing in between them and their biggest lives, their big yes. Like, what do you think it is that stops them?
I mean, it's hard. It's hard to look at yourself, honestly. And not just that, we have a million ways to avoid doing that with the way we live. We can check out in any given hour. You can check out in 50 different ways. You can check your phone, you can text everybody, you can watch Netflix, you can eat something, you can, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
It's very easy to check out. And we're busy, we're very busy. And so it's hard, it's painful, to look at yourself, especially if you're starting to see things that you don't necessarily like. A lot of, it's not a convenient thing to do, to really look at the truth of your life. It's often reveals things that are not convenient. Like, maybe my relationship is wrong. Maybe right. my job and my career that I've been invested in for 15 years is not where I want to be anymore. Maybe I have this horrific addiction to pain pills, and I need help, and that would mean I have to go away, and it would mean I have to admit that I have a problem, which is massive. And what does that mean, just for me or my family? So it's hard, it's hard, and it's painful, and it's scary. So there's a lot of reasons why we don't look at those things. But what I do say in the book is, like, addiction, it's not unique to, I think it's a very human, I don't think it is a very human experience. Everyone is addicted to things, right? A drug and alcohol addiction just happens to look not so great.
It's the age of distraction, for sure.
Yeah. And so, and beyond that, addiction is written into every religious text, into every, theological text. It's into philosophical text. It's human nature. We've recognized that from the beginning of time, this grasping and attachment and addiction to things. So it's just not that unique, which is another reason I really fought against the, like, here go the addicts over here, and here are the alcoholics over here, and then everybody else is fine. It's like, I don't think so.
Oh, I get it. I mean, I was the addicted to him person,
Yeah,
the love addict, codependent, and
right.
believe me, I was sick. I was
Oh,
sick.
I know. I know. I mean, I have had my whole experience with that side of things too, and it does make you just as sick in
So
the same way. So I mean, all of this traces back to original core wounds that we find ways to do. We find ways to cope and deal with life, and
yeah.
it starts very young. And sometimes those transform into really, unfortunate patterns later in life. You eventually have to deal with them, or they will bury you. you know
It's like if
and
you don't deal with them, they will deal with you for
they
sure.
will deal with you, and nobody gets away with anything. They really don't. No matter what we see on social media or what we think, nobody's getting away with anything. So that's what I try really hard in my book to normalize addiction, because there's so much shame around it. Everyone thinks they're the worst, and that it's this debased behavior, and it's just not.
You have a chapter called Magnificent Monsters. You talk
Mm-hmm.
about shame and how pervasive it is. And you probably had your own shame. You were a young mom and all of that. So how did you get through it? And what do you suggest to people if they're kind of experiencing the same thing?
Oh, yes, I had horrific shame. There's a special shame for mothers for sure, because there's nothing worse than a mom who, drinks, and or a drunk mom. And a few things. So I definitely, hearing other people's stories and talking about my own story was valuable. I wouldn't have made it if I didn't hear other women say things that were as horrific as the things that I had done or felt or said, had experienced. We all need that, because like I said before, we all think we're the worst. We all think we're the worst, especially the moms. It's like, it doesn't add up either. We love our kids so much. We know that. And yet we do these things that put them in significant danger, or just choose, the alcohol over them. And that can be as simple as, I reading your kid to bed at night while you're drinking. It feels terrible. It doesn't make sense. And so one of the things, that I always want to relay in any interview I do, because it's so important, is, and if they're moms listening or dads even, that this wonderful woman said to me in a meeting early on, because she had experienced the same thing in her drinking, and where she left her kids and she would leave them unattended and all that. And she said, addiction is stronger than love. And until it isn't, addiction is stronger than love.
Wow, that is profound.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
profound. It's also greater than truth.
Yes.
Like I always think that if you admit the truth, and I was going to get into a conversation about honesty too, because you talk a lot about that as well. If you have to admit something, like if you have to admit that, I think about if I have to give up this goodie, like this man or this drink or this, then I have to admit something that I don't want to admit, because then I'll have to give this up, and I don't want to give it up. So people right into denial, like it's.
Yeah. And it's, and look, like, this is the other thing, and this plays right into the shame thing. There are good reasons for why we do the things we do. Like, I didn't drink and lie and all that because I'm this debased, terrible person. I did it because I was very sick. And before I was sick, I was just doing whatever I had to do to cope and survive as a child.
Right.
And it grows and morphs into, like, our behaviors always have a good reason. We're afraid, or we're really sad. We generally, there are exceptions to this, right? Because there's truly psychopathic people, but generally our behaviors come from a kind place.
A wound. I'm also a therapist, and you're right, it's a wound.
we're trying, so we tend to, I for sure just wouldn't allow I couldn't see it that way, you know, and it took other women, other people reflecting that back to me over and over and over and over again for a long time, until I could finally really feel that way. And so that helps. I think that's probably the biggest thing with the shame piece. And I've also written about my story. I've talked about my story. There's nothing I haven't shared with someone, nothing, right? And that goes a long way. Like, I'm not hiding anything anymore, you know, and that secrecy will eat you up. It erodes you from the inside. So that was a huge piece too.
It's so courageous, really courageous, just to tell your story and to be so out loud about it. And I'm so grateful, you know, for people like you that kind of did start the conversation in a way that went beyond, because we know a lot of people never make it to a room, you know. Mm-hmm. So the fact that there's people like you doing this kind of work out and eradicating the shame, I'm so grateful. So what is the pregnancy principle? You talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So when we are early in sobriety of any kind, you know, it requires, so the way that this came to be is a friend of mine she was like 5 months sober. She was like, I'm having people over for dinner and I'm freaking out because I don't really want to serve alcohol, but I feel like I should because that's what we've always done. And she was having this big anxiety spiral about it, right? It was like, oh my God, like just think of it like you're pregnant. Like, if you were pregnant, you would not think twice about what you needed to do to take care of this life growing inside of you. Yeah. And sobriety is growing a new life. You are. And it is that precious, and it is, you're saving your life. I was. It's not any smaller than that. And if you can frame it, because we're never confused, whether, even if you're a man, about how important pregnancy is, and what, like, we never argue with a pregnant woman over what she needs to do to take care of herself, right? Ever. Right. Just like, yeah, of course you're going to go home and sleep. Of course you're not going to come to the party. Of course you're going to not eat that, or not drink this, or whatever. And no one needs to explain it. She doesn't need to explain it. It's just what you do. So it's self-care, but it's just so obvious when we think of it in terms of pregnancy. And so there were these like 4, you know, ideas around pregnancy that I put in the book that really just apply to early sobriety. It's like, you kind of have to say screw everything and everyone else for a while.
I love that as a metaphor. That's such a great metaphor, because you know, we're used to hearing, oh, it's a selfish program, you know, but that's a much.
Oh my God, I can't even. No.
I know. So I love that you've taken that idea and made it so light and just much less heavy, and just it's a great metaphor.
Yeah, it works. I mean, there's, you know, I get that it's not, most of it is when we quit drinking, our boundaries are crap, right? And we just like, oh, I think for most people, it's like, the worst thing that any woman thinks she could possibly be is selfish. And I talk about that. It's like, look, it's not selfish. You know, you're not helping anybody by pretending like you can handle these things right now. And
yeah, it's all, your whole message is so non-shaming. I remember, I just want to roll back a little bit when you were talking about, you know, you didn't just what I wanted to say is, you were talking about, like, you didn't want to be this bad mother or this whatever. That wasn't your intent, of course. And then I thought to myself, like, nobody wakes up and says, I want to like really hurt my children. I really want to like drive drunk. I want to, like in my ex-husband's case, I want to like, you know, lose everything and be homeless. I mean, you know, it worked until it stopped working. I know people talk about that, but truly, if you were wounded growing up, and this all goes back to Gaba Mate stuff, that if you had trauma, you know what, this was the best you can do. And that's it. So I just had to say that, because
no, it's true. And I think we tend to be able to generally give that to other people, you know, but rarely give it to ourselves. And, you know, especially mothers, because again, it's kind of like the worst violation of your core, it goes against what you think. I always thought, like, no matter what happens, I'll always like find her. I'll always go back to her, even when I'm drinking, and that didn't happen, finally.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to our cubs, you start telling us that we're bad when it comes to taking care of our cubs, and it's going to get ugly. I'm much older than you, Laura. I mean, probably because I don't know how old you are, but I have a 35-year-old daughter, and and I'm very proud of saying that. And I remember there was this show, Murphy something, with Candace Bergen. I don't know if
Murphy's Law.
Yeah, or maybe, what was it?
I don't know. It's the only Murphy show I know.
Okay, maybe that was it. I don't know. I thought she worked for a newspaper, whatever. But then Dan Quayle was like vice president, and then he made this announcement that single parents are bad, and that's why we have so much crime. And I was a single mom, and I just remember being so furious, like,
offended,
how this, like, I'm going to just say it, white man, tell me that I'm a bad mom because I don't have a husband that left me anyway, and it wasn't my choice. So, we're just very protective, right?
Yeah. Well, it's terrible. And it's like, you already feel, completely just annihilated.
Guilt-ridden.
Yeah. So, yeah, you can't, you can't survive the shame. And, I mean, I wrote about it a ton in the book. It's probably one of the most central themes because it was the hardest part to get through.
That's fantastic. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. What about this whole like sober curious movement, this movement of like, not everybody has to be sober. Like, do you think everyone should be sober? I mean, do you think that there is such thing as substance abuse versus alcoholism? And again, without using labels, do you think that some people can be mindful and intentional drinkers or something like that?
I think alcohol, I mean, if I'm honest, I think alcohol is just completely stupid. And I think in our lifetime, we will probably see a major shift in the perception of drinking, similar to how we have with cigarettes, from several decades ago. It's just ridiculously stupid,
glamorized,
and damaging, and it's completely glamorized. But that aside, no, I don't think anyone should be anything. I mean, I don't think that anyone should just should cast that upon, that judgment upon anybody. But I think we all could definitely take a look at how we use alcohol, no matter who you are, because it is fascinating how little we consider it a drug.
No, it's
based on the actual damage that it does. It's more harmful than all the other drugs combined, and it's responsible for, I mean, it goes on and on and on. The sober curious thing, though, is really interesting. So, and I have mixed feelings about it. Overall, I think it's great. Look, more people are talking about alcohol than, I mean, we just talked about what it was like in 2013, 14. It was like, among like, no one was going to bring up drinking as like, nobody. It's like, we just want to protect our drinking, and we're not going to talk about that, right? People are talking about it. There are more sober bars showing up. There are dry bars. There are people who are saying they're sober curious just to test it out. There's dry January and sober October and 1 year no beer.
Yeah.
I think that's great. Like, yes, please, more conversations. It raises the bar, which means more people will be willing to talk about it because they're going to hear more about it, right? So it's like not this taboo conversation so much anymore. That said, there is this interesting, and I've posted about this a few times because I really want, I think, what would I have done with this sober curious idea back then? And I would have used it as an excuse to keep drinking. I know that. So I was not sober curious. Like I had to stop drinking to save my life. It wasn't a political statement. It wasn't an act of feminism. It wasn't a trend. It wasn't a health kick or anything like that. I'm happy that that's happening. And I want to make that distinction for people who need to hear the serious message too, because You know, if you're hearing this, like right now, you know, if you're the one that's kind of full of shit when you're talking about your sober curiosity, right?
You're
But
so right. You're so
overall,
right.
I think it's great. I mean, hey, more sober places to go, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Great. I love your perspective. So what would be the most important thing you'd want someone to know who really does want to stop drinking and or stop whatever their thing is, whatever process addiction they might have, or
Yeah.
would be your greatest tip?
Um, you think I would have a really good answer to this? I mean, I think so. There's my advice, and then maybe something you can do that everyone can just do right away to start to work on furthering themselves, you know, on cracking that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone, I think writing is such an incredibly crazy, powerful practice.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking writing an essay, nothing that ever has to be seen, but literally you can pull out a pen and a piece of paper right now and write something true
Yeah.
to yourself, about yourself, whatever. Write down what's going on with you and write the truth. Like, no one's ever going to see this. You can burn it later if you need to. But before I ever spoke words, I wrote them down.
Yeah.
Before I ever shared my story out loud, I wrote them down. This stuff has to get out of your body, you know. So what we do, you're a therapist, you see this happen when people start to share their story and put words to their story and actually create a narrative for what's going on with them. It's so huge. And anyone can do that right now. You can write, you can start writing right now.
It's
and
so
if it's
funny.
a dream,
Yeah, I'm sorry. I get
no,
so
go ahead.
excited. I don't mean to interrupt because
No, you're not
I
interrupting
think
me. Go
I'm a
ahead.
pretty
No, I
good
want to know.
interviewer, except when I interrupt. But no, I just so often I just can't believe you're saying that because I always recommend start a blog. Just start a blog. Like I have this one person, she just started the highly sensitive person blog.
Yeah.
Because, you know, an empath. So I think you're right. Writing.
And blog might be too hard for people because it's like, oh my God, where's that going to go? Literally doesn't ever have to. I totally agree with you. Yes, please do that. But if you can't share, if you posting something online might seem super daunting, you can write, and writing is like, there's science behind its effectiveness. It's not just like this woo-woo, you know,
right,
cute, crafty thing you can do. It's actually very effective in starting to rewire your brain. It's starting to process your experiences. It ties into your limbic system. So you can do that. Anyone can do that. And then the other thing that I would say is just, we have this voice, right? I call it like the still small voice. We hear it, we pretend like we don't hear it, but it's there. And it tells us, like, even if it's just like, there's another way to live, you have to start listening to that, you know, and it wants you to listen. It wants you so badly to listen.
It'll act up if you don't. It'll become, or act out or whatever, for sure.
Yeah.
So Laura, where can people find your book, find your programs, find you?
So everything is on my website at my name, lauramckowen.com. And my book is sold everywhere books are sold. So Amazon, independent bookstores, all of it. Mm-hmm. So you can buy it anywhere. And all of my stuff is on my website.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.